Well, greetings, everybody. And I just want to welcome you to the Safe Passage webinar this week, which is also being recorded as a podcast. So, you know, it's sort of like I Love Lucy. It's recorded before a live audience here. And welcome Marie Cohen. I'm going to tell you all about her in a minute, but I just want to say, as we usually do, what's coming up. And what's coming up in 2 weeks is a conversation with Nikki Engel, who is a manager at Violence Free Minnesota, and she's going to talk about the intersection of domestic violence and child abuse and neglect. So we're looking forward to that. That's a coalition that we would like to really develop. But today I'm going to interview Marie Cohen, who is the creator and the writer of the Child Welfare Monitor. And as far as I know, you're the only blog of any size that's really dedicated to our space. I mean, there is an online newspaper called The Imprint, but I think you really approach it from a much more in-depth direction. And so we're going to interview and talk with Marie, and then at the end, we're going to leave time for Q&A and discussion as we usually do. So I want to start, Marie, by just expressing my personal gratitude to you. You have saved me so many hours.
I love it.
Research on my own about the issues that I care about. And, you know, Marie curates kind of the most relevant research. She picks, you know, the most important issues in the field. She analyzes them. She's a really great writer. She kind of, synthesizes everything. It's accessible. And if you want to follow up on something, she always has links in there. So it's a really great blog, and I appreciate it. And, just wanted to say that to start with. And then in terms of Marie's background, it's kind of intimidating, really. She's a graduate of Radcliffe College, which I think most of you know was the College of Harvard, and now it's just Harvard, as I understand it, and also of the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton, which, is obviously the leading public administration international affairs school in the world, except, just slightly behind the Hoover Humphrey Institute at the University of Minnesota, but it's #1 in the world. And also as an MSW from the University of Maryland, which I worked with quite a bit when I was out there in Maryland, so I know the school well. And Marie did social work in the District of Columbia. And for those of you who are guardians ad litem or otherwise involved, you recognize that she's a member of the Citizens Review Panel and the Child Fatality Review Committee for the agency in the District of Columbia called the Child and Family Service Agency, which I also know well because I did about a 2-year consulting job with them. So I can picture you, unless they move buildings, walking in and out of the place. And I just want to say on a personal note, just to acknowledge, Ukraine is top of mind for all of us right now. And I know, you have a direct tie to what's happening in Ukraine, including your involvement with the Washington Balalaika, is that how you pronounce it? Balalaika Society Orchestra, which plays, as I understand, and you can correct me, but it plays traditional Russian music, and you play an instrument called the damra. Is that how you say it?
Yeah. Oh, I put it downstairs. I was going to show you. Darn it. Okay. I already brought it downstairs because tonight is a rehearsal. Yeah, it looks like a mandolin. It's kind of round. Yeah, it's.
Well, anyway, I just thought you might want to say a little bit about your personal connection there. And I'm going to put a link in the chat box to everybody, which is like a 3 or 4 minute clip of this.
You're so nice.
It is so much fun. You will be up out of your seat dancing within, the first 20 seconds. So I encourage you to go look at that. So you might want to say a little bit about that before we get into the nuts and bolts of the podcast about your connection there with the Ukraine.
Okay, is it my turn? Okay,
yes.
I'm gonna start by saying that at some point when we were talking about how many people were going to be here, I said to you I couldn't really imagine anyone else would sign up for this besides my mother, who has been gone for at least 10 years. And then I realized, no, wait a second, my cousin would also sign up, and I'm looking at her right now. My beloved cousin Sharon Rubenstein is here, and since she's the only one I see, I'm wondering if maybe I am just doing this for you and her, but hopefully there are a few other.
Oh no, there's about 50 people here.
But I really, the idea of my resume being intimidating is is intimidating to me, because I certainly don't think of it that way. Okay, you wanted me to say something about the orchestra first, so I could. That's just something kind of wild that I've been doing for 19 years. And I don't want to get into it because I'll end up taking the whole hour, but I just fell in love with, I heard this orchestra, and basically we play traditional Russian folk instruments, but we play all kinds of music, Russian folk, Russian classical, and then all kinds of other music, including Ukrainian music, because it is so close to Russian music. And a lot of the people who play these instruments are Ukrainian as well, because when Ukraine was sadly part of the Soviet Union, these instruments are taught in conservatories. And so a lot of the greatest players of these instruments happen to be Ukrainian. So therefore, I have good Ukrainian friends from doing this, and I'm just going to stop talking about this. But I was telling you that today's kind of a hard day for me, because our Russian conductor of 19 years just resigned because we told her we supported Ukraine, and we want to make that clear. Turns out she doesn't. So I'm still kind of reeling. So if I act kind of weird, I'm kind of in shock about that. But going on to my background, which I don't think is intimidating at all, because I kind of this is my third. So I think of child welfare monitor as my third career. And it's my favorite one by far. And I think it's the most, I hate this word, impactful, but there really isn't a substitute for that word. The other two careers, but I don't make any money, and I'm just blessed that I can do that. My first two careers were first as a policy analyst and researcher, which somehow didn't give me a whole lot of satisfaction, because I felt like I was just producing reports that kind of ended up on somebody's desk. And then after taking a lot of time off to be with my kids, and then taking care of my mother as a classic sandwich generation person, I decided that I really wanted to work directly with people, and that's the way to make a difference. And so I became a social worker for 5 years, as you mentioned, got that second master's. And what I learned from that, I learned a lot from that experience. I mean, that really gave me the fodder for everything that I do now with Child Welfare Monitor. But what is kind of odd about it is that I hadn't really considered my strengths and weaknesses and what I love to do and what is hard for me to do when I made that change. It was just like, how can I best make an impact? And what I learned is that I'm a writer and researcher. That's what I'm better at and happier at, and and can last longer. So it wasn't sustainable for me being a social worker, but part of what wasn't sustainable about it was that I was a social worker in the District of Columbia foster care system. And that kind of leads into why I started my blog, which is probably going to be your first question, but I will just shut up and let you ask it.
Well, and for people who aren't familiar, and I hope you will become familiar with it because it's a great resource, but tell us just basically, what is the blog? What do you do?
What do I do? Right. Well, it's sort of changed. It's really completely a reflection of what I'm interested in. So I really cover pretty much any major issue in child welfare. And so whatever issue in child welfare you're interested in, I've probably written about it. It didn't really start out that way. It started out that because I had been a social worker in foster care, it was really a lot about foster care and the issues that I had that made it unsustainable for me, and I think for many social workers, which had to do with how much the social workers are expected to do and how many foster parents don't really act like parents, so that the social workers have to do that, and that's just like impossible. And then another thing I was obsessed with at the time was the extent to which the field is driven by benchmarks that aren't really meaningful, like what percentage of your kids got visited in the first week or whatever, just things that don't really matter and that don't have anything to do with what you're actually trying to achieve. But then I started branching out for various reasons and just going into some of the things that I started going into some of the things that I had always been interested in. Really, my first interest in child welfare. And actually the reason I went back to social work school was I wanted to be a CPS worker, which never ended up happening. But I wanted to do that because of my obsession with, having always read about these cases where the children are, where there's just been a child who has just been tortured, for months or years, and CPS comes and goes and never sees the red flags, and I thought that I was going to be the one who would see that, and I would, quote, save children. And oh, by the way, just a sidebar, is the first thing they told me at the Child and Family Services Agency in training is that I wasn't there to save children. So that was kind of a hard day for me, because I had just gone to school for 3 years. Yeah.
But one thing I think about you that might be a little different from a lot of people who do this kind of work is you've actually been in the trenches. And so you've seen what's going on. And I think I can see that in your writing, because I can see that you kind of cut through a lot of the policy chit chat that's going on around and get right at how does this actually work for kids. But how do you, with all that background and all the issues, how do you, what do you think are the big issues, the top 2 or 3 issues we really ought to be focusing on right now in the welfare world?
Right. Oh God, there's so many, but yeah, among the top ones, I'm going to say that right now, it's really, I'm going to say that right now, one of the top 2 or 3 has to be the placement crisis for what they call the high acuity youth, or the youth with the highest needs, because in a number of states, it has really reached crisis proportions. Like in Texas, there's a judge just on the point of holding them in contempt. There are all these, what they call children without placement, who are living in hotels and offices. And this is happening all over the country. I haven't heard anything specifically about Minnesota, but I know that like in Illinois, there are many, many children who are left in hospitals because there's no one to take them. There's nothing in between, like a regular foster home and then a psychiatric ward. So there are so many. So I would say that is one of the absolute top issues right now, because that sort of merges then with the big child welfare legislation that passed a couple of years ago, which is the Family First and Preventive Services Act, which is often called Family First. And that act was based on kind of two main pillars. One is that children, as much as possible, children shouldn't be removed from their homes, but if they are removed from their homes, they should be placed in a foster home and not any kind of group or residential setting. And the problem with that is they don't recognize that there are many of these young people, mostly they are older, but some of them are not, who have so many issues, behavioral issues, and sometimes cognitive issues as well, that they cannot function in any foster home short of a very, very therapeutic foster home that has a huge amount with like professional parents who also have help in the home. So anyway, the Family First Act is making it harder in various ways to serve these children, and it's making it harder to get approval or to get federal funding to place them in the kind of residential placement that they need. And so that is just exacerbating that crisis.
And I would say that's a good example of where you sit in the landscape, because the dominant wisdom in the field is what is behind this act. It's saying, we don't want to remove kids and put them in foster care, but if we have to, we certainly don't want to go to residential treatment. And for those who aren't, in the business, basically they took the money that they used for group homes and residential treatment centers for the deep end kids who need a lot of service, and they just moved it supposedly to the front end of the system for prevention. So it leaves all those kids adrift in the back, and the counties have to somehow, those kids didn't go away, right? So counties have to come up with the money for these expensive residential treatment centers and group homes. And in the meantime, on the front end of the system, they didn't actually come up with approvals for prevention services. So now there's like nothing, right? So it's a good example to me, Marie, of the kind of thing you do. And I'm sure you're always getting in trouble with people because you're never, where you're just swimming against the tide in this issue. And I think that's true in a lot of issues. So if you could help people who aren't, as I say, in the business, what is it that is, the thing that you've pushed back against the most on this new federal act?
Right. Yeah. Well, to be honest, I mean, there are a couple of things. One is this, the thing that I did most lately, and I wasn't even aware of at first, and most people weren't aware of, it's this very weird kind of technical conflict with Medicaid, which is called the IMD exclusion. That's not the one I'm going to talk about. I just wanted to say that is a huge issue because it makes it now impossible. They have mandated that there's only one kind of facility that can get funded called a QRTP, but now if it has more than 16 beds, it's now going to lose, the kids in it will lose all their Medicaid funding. So that's a huge problem. And it seems like some kind of, I think it was inadvertent, but I'm not sure. But I was going to say that the one that so that's a huge one, but I would say the one I actually pushed back on the most was this front end prevention thing, because maybe I didn't even notice that right away. But now that I've been watching very closely how it's being implemented everywhere, and especially in my home jurisdiction of DC, I'm seeing that it didn't actually, the states and jurisdictions are not drawing down very much money of this money that they supposedly got, because what they did is the only services that are included, I mean, they named these categories of parenting-oriented services, mental health, and drug treatment. Most of those are funded by Medicaid, and Medicaid is named in the bill as the first payer. Most of the states were already referring people on the front end, referring parents to these services before they took their children away. So if they had like in-home cases. So this bill didn't make a big difference. And there was all this talk, and there were all these people who were celebrating. There were people who said, I'm in tears that this passed. And it made so little difference. Most of the services that states are providing, they were providing already, and and it's just a lie.
So you lost the money on the back end, and you didn't pick up much on.
You didn't pick it right, and it's just heartbreaking, because that
gets pretty technical for people. But I think you get the idea that essentially this well-intentioned massive legislation ended up getting wrapped around the axle, and we actually kind of lost ground. But then there's the kind of policy issues where you're also kind of swimming against the tide to some extent. And I'm just curious about them, and let me just pick one or two.
Okay.
Push back and just see what kind of reaction you get. Have you gotten negative reactions? Have people, made it difficult for you? I'm thinking, for example, the movement right now to totally abolish child protection.
Right. No, I think, I've almost never gotten a negative reaction. I think I don't even exist. I feel like some of the people, I feel like most of the people just act like I'm not there. Maybe they haven't noticed me, or maybe they don't think I'm worthy of notice, but I don't. The exception is, I'm sure Rick Wexler is occasionally, said things. And I had a really, really bad experience a long time ago when, where he actually, he got them to he got the Chronicle of Social Change, which is now the imprint, to retract something that I had written when I was part of a blogger co-op that they had, and that was kind of the genesis of my blog. And they got rid of that a long time ago, and that was like the worst problem I ever had. But usually, as I say, I get very nice comments from people who want to add to what I'm saying, and often they just make me feel even sadder about what's going on because they give me more examples, and I've only once or twice gotten hostile comments, but in general, I just feel like I don't get any comment. And the when I explain how wrong a certain myth is, and then I just see it every day, repeated again and again. So I know, well, people didn't see what I wrote. Maybe I would be happier if they saw it and answered it, and at least I would feel it was being noticed, but I don't. Yeah.
Well, I think maybe, kind of a concrete example of something that you challenged, which was generally beloved, was blind removals. Maybe let me just explain briefly what that was. It was an effort, and I think it started in Nassau County, which I'm pretty familiar with because I was in Westchester County for 7 years. They had this process where you would kind of take everything out of a decision. You'd have a case conference about removing a child from their home, and they would remove any information that could give people who were making the decision an idea of where the kid lived, or what their background was and what their race was. And reportedly, they reduced the number of African American kids that were removed from their homes and put in foster care from 50+% down to around 20%. And this was going around for quite some time, a year and a half, and people were saying, this is great, we can replicate this and reduce the disparities in the system. But you pushed back on that, and I thought that was kind of courageous. But what was your analysis of that situation?
Yeah, well, I have to give credit to the great Emily Putnam Hornstein, who is perhaps the greatest child welfare scholar in the country. And she started it by giving I saw a presentation she gave about it. And then I decided she looked at the data, and she was the one who first, this number that was being bandied about, she was the one who first found out that nobody knew where it come from. It just been kind of made up. I mean, I never got I don't think anyone knows the genesis of that number. I mean, where it actually came from, because I never got an answer. And what was really, it is really discouraging, because the scholar who is always quoted as, she's credited with that number. Well, she wrote a qualitative piece about blind removals, and about how she said, because they had this great result, we wanted to look at it. And so she wrote a qualitative piece, but she just cited the numbers. And then I can't remember, I should have reviewed, but she gave a footnote or something, but it was just, so I asked her for where did they, because I can't find it. I can't see it. The footnote didn't have if there was a footnote, it didn't have the numbers. And she wasn't able, she kept referring me to the county, and the county wasn't able to respond either. But it was like, well, if you cited it, you need to be responsible for giving me those numbers. But she wouldn't. So I basically, that was like the main point, that they just couldn't, nobody could say where these numbers came from. And that when you actually look at the actual numbers, they didn't show, they didn't actually
exist. That's interesting.
Right,
well,
right. So,
another topic along those lines is that I know you're familiar with is neglect. And let me just set the stage a little bit. There's been legislation proposed in Minnesota, which I know Marie is familiar with, which is the idea that 70% plus of cases to go into child protection are, quote, just, unquote, neglect.
right.
Or those kids are going to be able to stay in place for 2 months while you go around and try to find a kinship placement or social services or whatever, or a safety plan. And it's a typical example of not having really very good information that informs public policy, because the purpose of this was to reduce racial disparities in child protection. And so it would be directed particularly at American kids. But it's true that 70+% of kids are screened in primarily or initially for neglect. It's also true that 72.9% of child fatalities last year were neglect, as the primary thing that got them into the system. So neglect is deadly. And so you have said, Marie, that your mission is to kind of destroy bad research.
Yeah.
What is that there's good research that nobody's paying attention to, kind of
right.
similar to your experience that the people, so we have all these great people like, Emily Putnam Hornstein running around, and there's a lot of really good folks. And my experience is nobody is actually paying attention to good research. And so that's where some of this bad policy and bad legislation coming from.
Yeah. And it just can be very frustrating because you can just, I can just write about it over and over again, and it just, the same things come up day in, day out. The same, tropes are constantly, so sometimes I wonder, is it doing any good? But I just feel like I have to speak up, even if it.
Do you feel you're getting any traction with any policymakers? Are you getting positive stuff where people are saying, oh yeah, this is good, I should have paid attention to this more, or whatever?
You should have warned me about this question.
I'm sorry, that was not it. Put you on the spot. I think you kind of already answered that. I was just trying to illustrate the fact that when there's really good work going on there, that the policymakers aren't really paying attention to it.
Yeah, it's hard. It's just like this juggernaut. It's just gonna find, this is the direction things are going, and they're just gonna find whatever fits in, and they're gonna use it, So it really is hard. Can you have a piece of research that actually changes things? Oh, Emily found this, and now we're gonna change, I don't know. I'd love to know, because I often think that my big mistake was not getting a PhD, and that I should have been one of these researchers. But do I know that it can ever have an impact, or is it just going to be used by whoever finds that it advances their agenda? But I just feel like, well, I just have to do it. I just have to speak out. It's better to have people who are saying the truth than not have them at all. But I don't know if it actually helps.
Well, I think we should put our heads together and figure this out, because I have the same exact experience, and so do so many other people. And I have a theory that I'd love somebody to do a paper on, which is, if you look at public health, for example, if you look at other related sectors, public health, mental health, they have one foot in the sciences. And so they do have some sense of accountability to good research and to being able to, document what they're doing. So in public health, I was part of a project where the number of children who've been screened for lead in their blood was very low in these 5 zip codes. So there was a process that they went through that they had honed over a period of time, and it involved, offering gift cards to Target and going through the local agencies that actually had, relationships with these folks, just driving people into these clinics and these local social service agencies to get their fingers stuck. And they dramatically increased the number of kids who had been screened for lead. Same thing with prenatal care. It was the public health people doing, kind of scientific studies, and they try things and they document it and they slowly improve. Same in mental health. Cognitive behavioral therapy may not be accepted by everybody, but it has been a process of refining over a period of time. And people, scientific, they check, they have to demonstrate that what they're doing is right, and if they can't, some things get dropped and some things get expanded. Doesn't happen in child welfare, in my experience. We don't have a foot in the sciences, and people just make up policies. For the past 50 years, they make up stuff. They get some big foundation behind it, and for 20 years, we're running in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
So I don't know, that was more of a little sermon, but I was just basically saying that the issue, Marie, to me, that, would like your comment on is whether child welfare is, I think it's not grounded really. I think probably we should switch and have some comments and questions from people. I can, pitch in with another question or two if we want, but we have one question here, which I'll read, which is how often are children removed who have poorly literate mothers who did not graduate from high school? I don't know where that's coming from. Do you know anything about literacy and removing children?
No, I really don't. I mean, in general, not a lot of children are removed nowadays, so that's the first thing to know. And I definitely think it's more, the more, less educated moms are more likely to have children removed than more educated moms, but that's about as far as, I don't know anything.
Well, so before we open it up further for questions, let me just ask, what's the next thing on your list? What do you really think is you're going to work on next? Because I know.
Oh my God. Yeah, I was telling you that I have gotten really, my time has been taken up by another project that I'm almost done with, and I'm desperately like I'm desperately trying to finish it this week because I have a list, and I was going to tell you my process for thinking of new things is that what I do is one of my favorite publications is, which I hope you all know about, is Child Welfare in the News. I know you know about it, right? It comes out of the Children's Bureau, and it's just like an old-fashioned clipping service. It also has helped my blog grow, so I love, because I actually tell them about my pieces, but normally, so they do provide my links to my pieces, but they also have, I think, an algorithm that search for child welfare pieces. So every day, a big part of my day is just to read the child welfare news clippings. And often there's something in there and more that sets me off. And more often than not, it is it's one of the old tropes or the misuse of research. I'm like, not again, you know, and I'm like, and I write it down. And so I must have, you know, and I actually, what I do, because WordPress allows me, I sort of start a new blog, but I don't really do anything with it. It's like a placeholder. So right now I probably have about 12 of them sitting there, and I have no idea which one I'm going to do first, but I'm just going to mention one of them because this was the one that hit me the most. And this was the one that made me say, okay, I've got to just do this now, even though I didn't. And it was just, and this is very typical. Of what gets to me. It's just a quote, okay? So this was Aisha Schomburg, the head of the Children's Bureau, from the imprint. And I think she was being, oh yeah, it was an article. Oh, I think it was the article about, and I was going to bring this up too, the movement now to repeal the Adoption and Safe Families Act. And I'm happy to talk about that more. But she was talking about that. And all of a sudden, at a conference of attorneys for parents, and she suddenly said she had recently learned of a 15-year-old father facing a termination of parental rights due to the Adoption and Safe Families Act, which requires that after a certain amount of time in foster care, the state start a termination of parental rights. And she said, that stays in my mind. It makes me think, how many young fathers are out there and maybe want to take care of their children, but are up against this timeline? I swear, I mean, after I picked up my jaw from the floor, I thought, okay, this woman definitely has a different way of thinking than I do. So a 15-year-old father, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is, what chance does this child have at all of any life that isn't going to end up in jail or dead, you know? So, and I think that the fact that her first thought was, oh, we've got to get rid of ASFA because a 15-year-old father might lose his rights. I was thinking, you know, obviously maybe the difference is that I think of the child first and she thinks of the parent first. So she's worried about the 15-year-old being sad because he lost his child. And I'm just thinking of, what chance does that child, I just want that child to have a chance. And we all know about teenage pregnancy. We all know we don't want 15-year-old girls having children. Has she just missed that? Or did she not, you know, there was a disconnect in her brain, but I really feel that's one of the blogs that I think I have to write, just to say, because I think it gets at, I mean, that's just one thing she said, but it gets at this whole way of thinking, which is parents' rights, and to hell with the children, you know.
Right,
So,
which is the constant. I think the theme is that you focus in on what each policy means in relation to the children. And I want to circle back to some things that I planned to ask early on, but we got down the road. Like, how many people do you read your blog? And I'm also curious as to how long does it take you to write these things, because they're very thorough.
Oh, you are so kind. And it really, as far as the time it takes, it really depends. Like, it would be possible, like, take the one I was just mentioning, maybe I could dash that off in a day because it would just be my passionate words flowing out. But usually there's a lot of research, and probably there would be a lot of research. I'd want to document a lot of things. And usually it's at least a week because I do so much. And, you know, we're so lucky with the internet now. So, you know, I do a lot of, it depends on what the topic is, but I'll find a lot of stuff. You know, I'll often get very acquainted with state data, and I might be looking at that if it's about a specific state, or I might be reading academic papers, which I am going to say that I am still have access from a job that I once had. I hope nobody from University of Maryland is listening, but I think I could get access to, with my husband, through my husband otherwise, but I get access to the University of Maryland database of journals. But I read a lot of academic journals, and I might email or call people if I want to know what they say. One thing that's weird, and my husband always says, my blog is kind of like a cross between journalism and research. I feel like it's more in depth than most journalism, and I don't go out on the street and talk to I don't go and talk to the relatives of a child that was killed by the parent and interview them, but there is a journalistic aspect of it. Sometimes I will be covering something. So
I was going to ask you, do you think of yourself as a journalist?
Right. Yeah. And I tend to think of myself, I really do think I should have gotten a PhD. So I think that ultimately I have the personality of a researcher, and I almost went back and got a PhD at the age of 60. And then I decided it was just silly, because I would be spending so much time that I could be like blogging and maybe affecting policy. I'd be spending all this time taking classes, and, I just decided it was too late. But that being said, sometimes I know I'm acting as a journalist. If I want to get information, I know I have to go to the communication office. I know they're in a state. I know they're going to think of me as a journalist. I know I'm not supposed to just go to the program people. And technically, I guess I'm a journalist. I think technically a blogger is a journalist. So I guess ultimately I am, but it's kind of like a cross. It's more researchy than most journalists.
Well, I want to open it up, but what I'd like to do is take the liberty just to summarize a few things that you've written to give people a little bit more of an idea of what they could look forward to if they do subscribe. And I think you have over 1,000 subscribers at this point, if I recall, right? So,
yes, and thank you. That was the part I didn't answer. I should have answered that first. I seem to have about close to 1,200 subscribers, and apparently my page has been viewed. I looked it up today in preparation. My page is viewed 174,000 times. So so at least people are looking at it. Maybe most people are just
looking.
Yeah.
Well, you never know. Bread cast upon the waters. But I think what I get out of it, and I'd like to segue to see if people have questions, is there's so many ideas that we just talked about that are just taken as gospel fact in the child welfare field that have no empirical basis whatsoever. People just make them up, and it's because they want the policy to be about family preservation, about not removing kids, and they just make stuff up. And so you challenge a lot of those things. And I'm just going to list a few of the things that, I got a lot of clarity from by reading. For example, what about child neglect? Do poor parents neglect their children more than parents who aren't poor? You answer that question. Homeschooling, how many kids are out there in homeschooling who are being abused or neglected and being, shielded from being seen by anybody in the, teachers or any authorities? What about the foster kids? Are foster kids really being damaged by being in foster care, or is it a good thing? Those are the kind of questions that you tackle, that you mind the research, and I think you make it accessible to people who aren't reading Emily Putnam Hornstein every week, And so if you want to say, well, who's got the answers to these questions, or where are people going down the wrong track? This is the best place to go. Because if you look at the imprint, which is a good, newspaper, online newspaper, they're going to be that sort of, well, there's this point of view, and then there's that point of view, and there's this side of the issue, and there's that side of the issue, which is not satisfactory if you actually want to get to the bottom of it. So that's kind of a little, advertisement for people. Just, I think it's, I should have probably put it in the chat, but it's childwelfaremonitor.org, right?
Right.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to put that in the chat box for everybody, and I will just open it up to see who has questions or comments.
Did you have any in the chat or no?
No, well, there was one. Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't get
I see. You only.
If you could read people.
Oh, I see one, but it's very specific, and it just says, what are the results in states that require CPS investigators to interview the children privately? And that, I thought that, I guess since that is required in DC, where I didn't even realize that it's not always required. I guess I should have realized that. I think that's definitely better. And I know that in some, I guess I should have realized, because I know in some cases when you read about an investigation after a child dies, you might read, oh, they interviewed the children in front of the parents. So of course the parents didn't, of course the children were scared and just denied the abuse. So so I would get, I don't know that we have any research on that, but that's just good practice, is to interview them. I mean, that's just something that should be routine.
And I think that's being asked because it's been on our legislative agenda now for about 5 years.
Okay.
Practice of interviewing children in front of the alleged perpetrators.
Yeah.
Seems self-evident, but it's a good example of people are saying this is a good practice in the field, and there's no basis for it. And, you know, I think the basic principle of science is that you should be able to disprove something, right? You should frame up a proposition such that it can be tested and either proven or disproven, or disproven in parts, and you throw that part away and you try something different. And you can't disprove the policy direction that you should interview children in front of the alleged abusers. Not because it probably couldn't be, but because once these things get rolling, nobody is really trying to actually support those policy directions with back it up with research. So
right. But you know, sometimes too, I feel like things are common sense like that. Like, I don't know if we have research about it, but it's kind of common sense that kids are scared, and we know a lot about psychology, right? And so sometimes things are common sense that people also disregard that, you know, and that always seems strange to me too, you know, especially when you've worked on the front line. And there's just some things that, well, I don't really need research, but I kind of just know, you know, and yet those seem also up for grabs that, well, not necessarily. And so
let me read the next
okay.
one. And by the way, you can just unmute yourself and ask these directly. We'd love to hear your voices, because we don't see too many of you. But it says, Marie, your blogs are wonderful. Thank you for being a fierce advocate for the child. This
Nice.
is so focused on the parent, and the children are often re-victimized by a system that does not put their best interest first. I want to meet you in person, whoever's writing this.
Oh, I'd love to.
Tried to start a legislative task force to change child welfare laws in your state, or in your case, the District of Columbia. A task force to change child welfare laws, which we had here in 2015.
Oh, oh, so they're suggesting doing that?
I want to know if you've tried anything like.
Oh, have I tried to do it? Well, you know, I'll tell you, and I don't know, I don't want to get too much on a tangent, but I did want to mention this though. So, first of all, let me just say one thing. I got off the citizen review panel, which you mentioned that I was on, because I didn't find it very useful. I think it could be useful. I think it has been useful in some places, but I just felt like we were spinning our wheels. But I'm still on the child fatality review panel, and here's where my main work in the district is happening right now. And I'm just saying this because I think other people might find this interesting. I have been kind of obsessed by the fact, and a huge issue of mine, and one that I have written about, is that all the confidentiality laws so that when a child is killed or severely injured by abuse or neglect, it's always the case that the state says, well, we can't say what we did because that violates confidentiality. Well, obviously that is protecting the state much more than it's protecting the families. So child fatality review, I've been very frustrated because I go to, I think it's the place where I learn the most that's relevant about how the system fails to protect children. I learn about how it does it in the District of Columbia, but I'm sure a lot of it is applicable elsewhere. But I'm not allowed to specifically say what happened in that meeting. I sign a form every time, right? And so that bothers me a lot. And I have testified, because I don't think that that's right. I think that anything, the narratives that we see don't have any names in it. And I personally, and have told the council, I testify every year, by the way, I told them that I think that should all be public. But believe it or not, because of my work and that of a couple of other people, we're making a little bit of progress. And I don't know how much I should say, but because of my testimony and that of some other people, and all because we talked to people on the council, we ended up with 2 council members on child fatality review. Remember that DC is kind of this bizarre city state, right? So we only have 1 child fatality review panel, and we have the city council, which is our legislative body. So 2 of them are on the panel, and they now understand what I was talking about, particularly a human services person. And long story short, we are working together. It's at the very early days yet, but we're trying to get some more transparency so that at least to get the district to report what it is mandated by CAPTA to report, because all the states are mandated to report a certain number of things by CAPTA, and almost none of them are doing what they're mandated to do. So they're supposed to report, like if a child dies of abuse or neglect, they are, and I know you're working on this too, on this issue, they're on looking at deaths. So you understand the importance of this, because this is how you find out what went wrong and what needs to be changed. These are the canary in the coal mine. These are the worst cases of failure. So all states are required by CAPTA to report on previous contacts with the system. What was reported in the past when a child died? What did the state do? None of them are doing that. And so long story short, I'm working with the council, with a member of the council, to make sure DC does that. And we're at the early stages, but I'm really excited. This is what I'm most excited about. So right now, that's my focus with DC and with this legislator, is using the fatality review panel to make more of it public.
So no legislative task force, but you are working with the elected officials, which I think.
Absolutely, and that is absolutely key. And I do feel DC is small, and the bad thing is I can't affect as many children, but I can be known. I am known to the
which is good. Well, I want to follow up in a minute, but first with that, because of the issue of transparency, but you just make sure you see this next comment, which is,
okay,
as a follow-up to Casa Rock County's question. I assume that's Rock County, Minnesota, if not.
Oh no, I know it's Wisconsin, because I wrote about them and they're wonderful. They've been following me because of the blog that I wrote.
It could be.
Hi.
Well, it is Rock County, Wisconsin.
Yes, and you all have to read the blog about Rock County. It's only a few back from the top. Yeah, it was.
There is a Rock County, Minnesota, but it's
okay.
9,000 people in it, so I didn't.
Thank you for coming online. Yes, thank you.
Well, so as a follow-up to that question, what emphasis would you put on legislative change versus enforcement, and how important is budget allocation? And I agree with Sandy. I don't know if she knew your name, but I agree with Sandy. It's a wonderful blog.
Oh, thank you so much. But I missed a bit of the question. What emphasis would I put on?
And you can read it too in your chat if you want.
Oh yeah, okay.
Legislative change versus enforcement, and how important is budget allocation?
Oh, they're all important. I don't I don't know how to. Yeah, they're all. I can't give a really good answer. I think they're all important because there are definitely things that are already in legislation. Like I was saying, CAPTA mandates the release of certain information, and yet it's not being enforced. So that's important. But then
being the federal law.
Yes, right. But in some cases, you need legislative change. And then, yeah, I think money is, I wish I knew. Some people are always saying it's not money, it's just the money isn't being used right. And I'm sure there's some of that, but I just feel like social workers are so underpaid and overworked, and we must need more money, especially, well, in all parts of child welfare. But when you think about investigations, obviously they can't do a good job if they're overwhelmed. So I think that money is important, but I do tend to think, and I am going to just get on my soapbox for 1 second about money. I do think money is spent on the wrong things. I think money is spent on a lot of training, consulting, all kinds of like garbage, to be honest with you, all kinds of special. I noticed when I was a line worker, how many specialists were there telling me how to do their job. If only all of that money were used to hire more workers, we'd all have more time, you know? So I do think that, again, the money could definitely be spent better, and we could all benefit by some good audits, and not just, oh, here's more money to spend as you want to spend it. But
So
I do, yeah.
I have a couple suggestions for you, but first of all, Sandy wants to know if your state has an ombudsperson. Is that directed to Minnesota, or is that directed to DC, or both?
Either one.
Okay. Well, I'll say for us, we do not. There's an organization here, a new one called Foster Advocates, which has got some legislation this year to have an ombudsperson for foster youth. So they're working on that legislation. And, you know, if I can get you the contact for who's working on that legislation, if you're interested, you can just get on, you know, just send us an email from our website.
And that's another of my passions. So we are in the process of hiring one. I testified in favor of the ombudsperson very passionately. So I thought that was absolutely key. And now the district is in the process. They have a search firm now looking for the ombudsperson. I think that'll be really important. It's not, I don't think it should just be for foster care, but it should be for all child welfare, and it needs to be independent. So right. It's important to distinguish between, even our DC and our Child and Family Service Agency has an internal ombudsperson. That's not the same thing. So, so I'm very,
what we have in Minnesota actually is ombudspersons for parents. So if
right.
The child protection system is doing, they could go to their ombudsperson. I just wanted to toss a couple of ideas out for just because of these questions. There's two ways I think that you can get budget money for child welfare. And one that we did get done in our legislative task force a few years ago was to raise the standards for what cases get screened in, because every county in Minnesota was doing their own thing, and we were only screening in 28% of the child protection referral or reports. And so by having common standard, we went up to 44%, and that meant about 12,000 more kids were getting screened in each year, and they all have Medicaid and Title IV-E money or Title IV-E money attached to them. So we ended up with $220 million increase in total revenues in Minnesota from 470 to $690 million. And they hired 400 more caseworkers around the state. So now you don't hear any complaints about caseloads anymore. And they may be in some situations, but on the average, they're not. And the other thing you can do, so, working on, actually drawing down those federal revenues for, that come along with case management services is one thing that turned out to be, to some, an unintentional consequence. Yeah. I knew about that just because I did a lot of revenue maximization work when I was in human services. The other thing is this, in DC, and I know this because I saw this happening. We all have some version of what's called the SACWA system, which is the Social Services Information System, right? And it's an enormously frustrating computer system, which takes, I've done an actual poll of about 15 states on this for a client once. 15 or so states, and people were saying 50 to 75% of caseworkers' time is spent to get that system to work. And when I was in DC at the Child and Family Services Agency, I actually saw 2 social workers quit on the spot and go screaming down the elevator, yelling because they had spent like 2 days trying to get something into their version of social service information system, and the system crashed. And they just said, "That's it, I quit." So that's kind of a symbol of the frustration that workers are facing across the country with this mandated computer system. And from my experience in business process redesign, in consulting, typically if you do a process where you just redesign the system, you eliminate duplication, you stop producing reports that nobody uses, you reduce handling, stuff like that.
Right.
You can cut by at least 50% the amount of time that people are spending. Sometimes it's more like 90%, but saying it's 50%. all of that money, let's say you went from 50% of workers' time that being spent on the computer system to 25, that would all go to direct service. It would immediately go to their time, would be able to be spent on direct service. So those are two things that suggest is really look at the federal revenues coming in that are related to kids. And if there's an increase, there should be more money in the system from, Medicaid in particular. And secondly, redoing that's their version of the computer system. Does that make sense?
Do you want me to comment? I'm a little bit nervous about your first one. Do you want, because it sounds to, as far as I know, you don't get money from screening in kids, you get money from bringing them into foster care. Yeah. And saying, you don't want to say, let's bring more foster kids into foster care to make more money, because that's what they were.
But I'm saying on the case management for children in child protection
oh, okay. I didn't realize that. So your knowledge is much more deep than mine.
When I was in Maryland, that's one of the things I worked on is kids and I got together and pursued.
That's okay. I did not know.
Many years ago, and it's still out there.
Okay.
So you get 50% reimbursement for case management services in child protection. So without them having to be in foster care. Now, Greg Gardner, who's one of our board members and a retired child protection supervisor, is reminding us that there is an ombudsperson, Office of Ombudspersons for Families, but that's what I was referring to, is that, Greg, that is used, as far as I understand it, by parents or foster parents when they don't think the system is doing what it should for them. That could be. So Greg, if I'm wrong on that, or you have other experience, weigh in.
Yeah, well, foster parents often are the advocates for the children. They will often say, like, the agency isn't doing the right thing for this child. So I would expect them to be contacting the ombudsperson. I just would want it to be, for anyone, whether it's the family or the child themselves, or, but one thing I just wanted to say really quickly, if you don't mind, maybe is that the one thing I didn't get, I wanted the ombudsperson to review child fatalities, and I didn't get that. And in some cases, it's not always an ombudsperson. Some states have a child advocate, and they are doing some of the best work. New Hampshire, Massachusetts, so I wanted that, and I'm hoping to still get that. But right now, we just want to get the ombudsperson on board, and they are going to serve on child fatality with me. So I'm going to be whispering to them, because they can get any information they want. So I'm going to be saying, you better get this information,
Right.
on this.
No, that would be great if we had that. Yeah. And I also want to mention on the transparency thing, we do have a law in Minnesota that says that every county, when there's a child fatality, has to do a fatality review report, and they have to, within 60 days, I think it is, and then they have to make it available to the public. But it's very hard getting those reports out of the county. In fact, we're doing a study now.
That's what I saw that. Yes.
We're doing a study where we're looking at all the child fatalities since 2015, which is over 80 of them. And we're trying to get those records from the counties. And we had to, even though it's in the law, and the state will not release them. The state gets them, and they won't give them to us either. So you have the law is good, but you need to make it work. I see that Greg is about to weigh in here, and I think we're going to have to wrap it up after that, because we're
just an FYI, the state website states that the ombudsperson for families serves both children and families. Now, if somebody has to advocate on behalf of the child or behalf of the family, children probably aren't going to call the office directly, whereas parents are more likely to contact the office.
Right.
But at least on paper, they represent both children and families.
But what will happen, at least in all the cases I've been involved in, is that it will be a disgruntled parent who is angry about the child removed, or a grandparent who thinks a child should be removed and they're not.
Yes, that's very common.
Greg, of what you're talking about, but by and large, I don't think the child's voice really gets into the mix that often. At least not in my experience. I haven't done any study of it. But, well, Maria, I think we should wrap up, because we promised people this will be an hour. I would suggest that if anybody has more questions, just send it to us and we'll relay them. And we have the link to her website, or the website. It's just childwelfaremonitor.org. And I just want to thank you, Marie, and it's been great. And just keep cranking that stuff out because I use it all the time. And one of these days, you and I will, people will actually react to what you're saying, and we'll get action.
I hope so too. And thank you so much. I mean, I've said to you before, you're the person I write this for. I mean, because that's one question. What's my audience? There are different audiences, but one of the main audiences is state advocates. I think you guys are so important. And I'm one of you in DC. So
Right, yeah.
So thank you for doing what you're doing.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. And thanks for taking the time and doing this. And we appreciate it. And we'll see all of you hopefully in 2 weeks when we talk with about domestic violence and child abuse.
That sounds really interesting. Thank you so much.
All right, we'll see you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.